Hi, we are talking about the concepts of national income, and we have already talked about the concept of national income, GDP, GNP, NNP, GVA, and related issues. Going forward, the next heading is the next subheading that we need to discuss here, the methods and estimation of national income. In what way national income is estimated, that means the methods. Methods, broadly, you must know there are three methods to estimate the national income across the world. Broadly, there are three methods: income method, production method, and expenditure method. Under income method, income is estimated. Under production method, the value of production is estimated. And under expenditure method, the value of expenditure is taken. It means that expenditure becomes the base for estimation of national income. But here the main question is that sometimes I have seen the question here. The main question is that which method is applicable in India? That needs to be understood clearly. As far as the Indian system is concerned, you must remember that in India, the combination of income method and production method has been adopted in our country for the estimation of national income. Combination of income method and production method has been adopted in India for the estimation of national income. As far as the use of expenditure method is concerned, it is very negligible, and it is because of the lack of sufficient data. In India, a major part of economy is unorganized. So it's very difficult to get the data from the unorganized sector, and in what way the people are spending and what's the facts and figures, how to get the data properly. There is no proper mechanism for that, and that's why the data of expenditure are not properly available in our country, and that's why it's not in use. So if there is any question in the examination that which method is applicable in India for the estimation of national income, answer is clear: the the combination of income method and production method. While the use of expenditure method is negligible, it is because of lack of data. But it doesn't mean that question will not be put up on expenditure method. Why? Because it's a method and it is up to the examiner, and it has been the question in the previous examination also. In fact, under expenditure method, national income is estimated using following formula. This is the formula: national income is equal to C plus I plus G plus X minus M or NX. X minus M or NX both are same. Here C for total consumption expenditure, I for total investment expenditure, G for total governmental expenditure, X minus M thing, the same thing that what we have already mentioned, that is net income from abroad or net export. Both are almost equal. Net income from abroad or net export. Generally, net export is mentioned here. As far as the relevance of this equation is concerned, I have seen question based on these equations. Sometimes the same equation is given in four different ways, changing the sign of this plus minus. But the given equation is clear, so it must be remembered to all of you. Another type of question based on this kind of equation, that suppose 4 meaning of C is given, either 4 meaning of I is given, either 4 meaning of G is given in this way, and you'll have to choose the correct answer. So it is up to you. So the implication is that if the entire equation is clear to you, you will be answered properly. It will be easy for you to answer the correctly. As far as the estimation is concerned, estimation means who are the person who started the estimation. And it has been the question also, who was the first man to estimate the national income of India. The name is well known, Mr. Dadabhai Nauroji. Dadabhai Nauroji was the first man who estimated India's national income in 1868. You might have heard this name. Mr. Dadabhai Nauroji was one of the freedom fighters, as well as he was one of the well-known journalists during the national struggle, freedom struggle, belonging to Mumbai, and a very learned person. He wrote so many books, and apart from his other books, one book is very important, and that is the name is uh, Poverty and Un-British Rule in India. The name of his famous book is Poverty and Un-British Rule in India. For the first time, he mentioned the national income. He clarified the criteria of national income and estimated national income in this particular book, and he estimated 20 rupees per capita income in those days. In fact, it was a deliberate initiative. No one asked him to do this thing. It was up to him because he was a nationalist, so he wanted to expose the Britishers. And in the same book, he set out the theory of he set out there is a very well known theory, drain of wealth. Drain of wealth means he explained the entire mechanism that how Britishers utilized Indian resources for their own favor, for their own sake. So the mechanism was clarified, and that was mentioned, and that was reflected through the drain of wealth. So that was all about Dadabhai Nauroji. After one another person not mentioned in this list, that name was Professor V.K.R.V. Rao. You'll have to note it. Name is not mentioned here. It has been skipped. Professor V.K.R.V. Rao was another person who adopted for the first time the scientific method for the estimation of national income. Scientific method means the method we have already discussed here, that is income method, production method, and expenditure method. He set out these methods and he used the method for the first time to estimate India's national income around 1925 to 29. Okay. So if there is any question who adopted scientific method, the name is Professor V.K.R.V. Rao. But all these efforts were made before independence because British government didn't develop any proper mechanism, any proper method to estimate India's national income because it was not relevant for them. That's why some people like Dadabhai Nauroji, Professor V.K.R.V. Rao were made the efforts deliberately to estimate India's national income. But meanwhile, in 1947, we got independent. We got independence, and after independence, it became pertinent for us to know the real situation of Indian economy. But there was no method, there was no organization, there was nothing because there was no method was adopted by the Britishers. Therefore, Prime Minister Nehru immediately appointed a committee in 1949, and that committee was chaired by Prashant Chandra Mahalanobis. You might have heard this name, PC Mahalanobis, a well-known statistician of his time. In those days, he was a well-known person. And Mr. PC Mahalanobis presented two reports to the government relating to India's income and production. But meanwhile, for to handle this issue for a longer period, at a permanent basis, an organization was created that was called CSO, Central Statistical Organization. Initially, when CSO, it's a well-known name you might have heard, was established in 1951. Initially, it was organization, but later on, it was It was became an office, Central Statistical Office, under Ministry of MOSPI, that is under Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. And thereafter it was started talking, it was started saying office. Okay, so CSO started estimation of India's national income and production. Thereafter, until 2019, it continued. Okay, so there were two organizations in our country. CSO was the organization to estimate the national income and GDP and all the related facts and figures, related parameters, especially for the organized sector of economy. And for the unorganized sector, there was another organization called NSSO, that is National Sample Survey Organization. Initially it was also organization, later on became office. It was established in 1950. I am discussing too much detail here. Why? Because in 2020, 1920 you can say, even this year, the very beginning, government decided to merge both CSO and NSO, and it has been completed. This work has been completed, and the new organization will be known as NSO, that is National Statistical Organization. After the merger, the new organization will be known as National Statistical Organization, and the entire mechanism of data collection has been handed over to NSO. So you'll remember NSO, erstwhile CSO NSO, right now NSO. When CSO was presenting its annual report, that was called National Accounts Statistics, NAS. So these are some facts initially, and you must remember. CSO in the very beginning, to estimate the national income and GDP and all the related parameters, divided entire Indian economy broadly into three sectors. That is primary sector, secondary sector, and tertiary sector. As far as, in fact, these kind of sectoral analysis are based upon the different kind of nature, the nature of production. Just consider one by one because this area is very important for the examination for both prelims and mains. Primary sector. Primary sector is that sector that produces raw material. Just consider on the components of the primary sector. The main components of primary sector is agriculture, and that's why it is also known as agriculture sector. Agriculture, fishing, forestry, animal husbandry, mining and quarrying also are the components of primary sector. In the entire primary sector, the contribution of agriculture is largest. That's why it is also known as agriculture sector. So primary sector contributes to economy by providing raw materials. Okay. Second one is secondary sector. Secondary sector is the manufacturing sector, and the main role of secondary sector is to convert the raw material into finished goods. Okay. As far as the components of secondary sector is concerned, manufacturing, that's why this is also called industrial sector. Second component is construction. Third one is electricity supply. This kind of utility are also the part of secondary sector. So service this electricity supply is also the part of secondary sector. Okay, and third one is tertiary sector, that is also known as services sector. Services sector where services are promoted and things are and the commodities are consumed. When we consider the contribution of these sectors to the GDP in our economy, based on the last 5 to 6 year data, The contribution to the GDP in primary sector has been between 17 to 18%. Secondary sector 29 to 30%. Tertiary sector 54 to 55%. So there is no substantial change in all these facts and figures. Little bit changes can be seen from time to time. Uh, as far as the nature of all these sectors are concerned, if you could remember, if you could understand, under primary sector, whatever the components we have mentioned, all those components are natural component based on nature. In other words, you can say that God gifted. We didn't develop anything about them. Like suppose their land was there, that's why you started agriculture. Forests are the natural products. So in this way, primary sector is completely based on nature. Secondary sector, manufacturing sector. Tertiary sector, services sector. So there is a gradual process with respect to gradual transformation of the sector. Say for example, generally economy in course of time, in the course of development, first transform from primary sector to secondary sector, and thereafter secondary sector to tertiary sectors, depending on the economic condition of that particular country. As far as the Indian perspective is concerned, you know, after independence, if you could recall, the new government came into power immediately after independence. They gave too much focus on agriculture sector. For the next, for first 5 years, they focused only on agriculture. Why? Because that was the prime, that was the priority of the government to provide at least bread and butter to each and every Indian, and that's why government decided to focus on agriculture sector. But thereafter they started focusing on industrial sector, and it continued till 1990. So I mean to say, giving focus on primary and secondary sector, the situation was so alarming, and situation was so complex, and the challenges were so vital that it continued till 1990. The year 1990 is considered a dividing year, a decisive year with respect to Indian economy, because around 1990 India faced such an economic crisis that was being faced by the country for the first time. Though it was the crisis of foreign currency, because in around 1990 India's foreign currency reserve was at the lowest level, and it was so lowest level that it was not enough to cover the 1 week of import. So that was the problem. No country was ready to help us. No organization was ready to help us. Ultimately, crisis was started, intensified, and ultimately in 91 we started economic reforms. This area is very important, and once again we'll discuss in detail in some other chapters. So here you will remember that in what way there was a changes in all these sectoral analysis. Around 1990, it was the period of economic crisis in the country. In order to come out from the crisis, India adopted economic reforms in 1991, that is referred to as LPG, that is liberalization, privatization, and globalization. Globalization means integration of domestic economy with the rest of the world. In fact, in 1990, the situation was so critical that no country was ready to help us. No organization was ready to help us. Situation was so alarming that at any time Indian economy and government of India could be declared as bankrupt. Bankrupt means, uh, rather than saying the bankrupt, the term defaulter is more viable. Anytime government of India or the India would be declared as a defaulter nation. Defaulter means today there is a time of payment and I say that I don't have money. That is called default. situation was so critical. There is an organization, International Monetary Fund. We'll discuss in detail under foreign sector about IMF. In short, that is called IMF. You might have heard the name. India is one of the co-founders. Co-founders mean founding members of IMF. And the main function of IMF is to provide financial support in such a critical situation to the member countries. So, but initially, when the situation was critical, even IMF denied to extend any financial assistance to India, any financial support to India. But after some months, when IMF saw that if India is not supported, Indian situation might be transformed into regional economic crisis. So ultimately they came forward and they put up several conditions to the government of India. Since there was no way out, that's why government accepted all those conditions unconditionally. Conditions like that, the government of India will open the door of Indian economy for the foreign companies, for the foreign capital. Government will not distinguish between foreign companies and Indian companies. They will not distinguish between foreign capital and domestic capital. Means whatever the facilities they will provide to any Indian company, all those facilities would be unconditionally available for the foreign investors also. Another thing is that whatever the steps and strict rules and regulations had been adopted by the government of India initially will be left gradually. The government in those days was led by Narasimha Rao, Honorable Prime Minister, and Mr. Manmohan Singh, Honorable Finance Minister. Both were learned person. They accepted all the conditions, and that was the starting of economic reforms, comprehensive economic reforms in our country. But as a result, what happened? As a result, what happened? Suddenly there was a surge of huge foreign capital into tertiary sector, and tertiary sector suddenly got momentum. So it was assumed that for a while that Indian economy, rather than transforming from primary to secondary sector, it was directly transformed from primary to tertiary sector. And it was the based on this kind of situation. Some years back, I think in 2015 or 14, there was a question in mains also. The question was that in this way questions are being set up. That's why I'm just from time to time sharing the questions with you also, the way in which the questions are being set up. The question was that generally economy is transformed from primary to secondary and secondary to tertiary. But in case of India, it seems like that Indian economy transformed directly from primary to tertiary sector. Is any economy could develop without the development of secondary sector? Discuss. So that it means that you will have to answer this kind of question. These are the analytical question. If you are having the basic understanding of economy, that will be very easy to answer this kind of question. Okay. So in this way, tertiary sector got momentum, and thereafter it is growing day by day. And even today, you have seen that the contribution of tertiary sector is highest in our GDP. But it doesn't mean that yes, there are some more analysis, and you must understand that whatever the figures I have mentioned here, 17-18%, 29-30%, tertiary sector 54-55%, this is only the value of production. You may put up the question, if the role of contribution of primary sector or agriculture sector is very less, is the least out of all these three. But even after that, we are said to be agrarian economy. So it looks like prima facie, it looks like contradictory, but there is no contradiction. We'll have to analyze both facts are correct, but we'll have to analyze separately in different perspective. When we speak like that Indian economy is still agrarian economy, it means that even today more than 64% of our population is depending on agriculture for their livelihood, and that's why still we are agrarian economy. With respect to this kind of contribution, these are the only the value of production. So even today you may realize that whatever we are producing in a year, the primary sector's contribution is less. Why? Because the valuation and the pricing in the primary sector is very less today. I can give you very so many examples. Even today our farmers are suffering. Even today our farmers are not in position to decide the price of their own products, and that's why government intervention is required here. It's a it's completely unfortunate, and it's a paradox in our country that when a manufacturer produce more, they get more profit, but unfortunately when our farmers produce more, they get loss. So the situation is very alarming, and though government in the past years has taken a lot of steps for this to combat this situation, this problem, but even today the process is still going on. So that is the meaning of contribution of primary sector with respect to the value. It doesn't mean that our agriculture is going to be reduced. The entire, when we total their contribution in GDP, it is always 100. So if someone is developing, suppose the contribution of tertiary sector will be increasing and the total is 100, it means someone is decreasing. So the maximum chance of decrease in the primary sector, because total is always 100. Just think differently. When we compare the contribution of primary sector with respect to the developed countries of the world, there is a wide gap. In India, suppose it is 17-18% around. In developed countries of the world like USA, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, some other countries, it is hardly 2 to 3%. So if their contribution in 2 to 3%, does it mean that their farmers are fighting for survival? No. There is no issue. Their economic condition is much better than the Indian farmers. But it means that it indicates that the major contribution in those countries are coming from the tertiary sector. So the implication is that as economy grows, you remember it, it has been a question in UPSC also. As economy grows, the contribution of primary sector decreases and the contribution of tertiary sector increases. The contribution of primary sector decreases and contribution of tertiary sector increases. That's the trend, and the same trend is being followed in our country. So it was all about the sectoral analysis. After the sectoral analysis, the next subtopic under national income is the activities not included under estimation of national income. It is reflecting on your screen also. Here the meaning is that there are so many economic activities not included under estimation of national income. When you solve the last year question paper several times directly or indirectly, so many questions have been based here. So we need to discuss in detail. There are some activities here and you will have to remember with example. Whatever the example I will share with you, examples are important because I've seen several times question based upon the examples also. The first activity is intermediate goods and services. Intermediate goods and services. Try to understand. In the very beginning, when we started discussing the meaning of GDP, I focused on the importance of finely produced commodity goods. Finely produced, finished goods. Okay. But in the crisscross of economic activities, it happens that somewhere a particular product is finished, but in other case the same product is used to make some other products. In such a condition, even that finished good will be considered as intermediate goods, and that will not be included under national income because it has been already included. Say for example, you can take the example of tires and cars. Generally, tires are manufactured by different companies, other companies, and in case of tire manufacturers, the tire is considered as finished goods and added to the GDP. If the same tire is being used by the car companies and added to the value of the car, this will be a double counting. And you'll have to remember here, double counting is one of the biggest hurdle in the estimation of national income. And that's why it is expected that it should be avoided. So in case of car, tire is considered as intermediate goods and this will not be included. Okay. Similarly, you can take a lot of example in this case. Okay, so there are so many example of intermediate goods. You remember that intermediate goods and services are not the part of national income. Next is non-economic activities. So obviously the entire activities are of two types, economic and non-economic activities. Try to understand through an example. Suppose there is a nurse working in hospital. When she will work in hospital, it means she is doing a service and she is doing a service and she will get salary in lieu of that. It's economic activity. But suppose if the same nurse starts some services to her family members, the similar kind of services, family members, relatives, this is non-economic activity. This will not be included. Housewives, non-economic activities. Suppose there is a serviceman. On Sunday, he is on holiday and producing vegetables in the kitchen garden. It is non-economic service. So non-economic activities are not the part of national income. Only economic activities are considered as estimated. Third one is transfer payments. Transfer payments means one-sided payment. Any payment made by the government under which there is no obligation to return it back, as well as there is no obligation to do some work. Getting my point? If government is making such a payment that where there is no obligation to pay it back to the government and there is no obligation to do something in lieu of that payment. And the best examples are different kind of welfare payments like old age pensions, scholarships. Uh, in some states there is a provision of unemployment allowances also. So these are not given to generate the income. These are the supporting. They are it just being provided by the government to support them, to strengthen them, so that they could be able to earn something thereafter. So this kind of payment are considered as transfer payments, and transfer payments like scholarships, unemployment incentives, old age pensions are not the part of national income. Okay, because those people are not doing any economic activity. Fourth one is capital gains. Capital gains, it's a typical situation in economic activities. It takes place in some certain cases. Cases of land, sale and purchase of land, cases of gold, in the cases of shares generally, shares and securities, in the cases of antiques, in the cases of painting, which means that if there is any lottery, in cases of lottery also, it's better to explain it through an example. Suppose today you purchase a lottery of 100 rupees, okay, and by the next day you got 10 lakh lottery, a lottery of 10 lakh. What you have done? You have done no economic activity. It's just a chance. So it will be considered under capital gain. those people are involved in sale and purchase of lotteries. They are involved in economic activity and they will pay tax to the government. Whenever they will pay to you your lottery amount, they will deduct the tax